Carol Muller was supposed to be here and can't be here, so I'm going to introduce Jappe van der Westhuizen from South Africa, who's going to talk on using farmers' records to determine genetic parameters for fertility traits for South African Holstein cows. Jappe, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I can express some opinions, but I will probably not be able to take questions, so we can have a little bit of a philosophy talk afterwards on issues. So this is basically landed on my lap at a very late stage, and the Chairman also asked me to reduce the slides, so which I did last night. So I'll give it a good go. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is part of a postgraduate project at the University of the Western Cape, Stellenbosch, that Carl Muller was supposed to give a talk on. So this is basically based on data that was acquired from specific or a whole range of herds, dairy herds in South Africa. We have the same problem, I think, as a lot of other countries, or maybe not the European countries, that some traits of high economic importance are not really recorded on the centralized database. So we're in a process of also extending that. And I think this is also an effort to show the value of some of the reproduction traits as far as that's concerned. So I think everybody is familiar with the fact that for a long time selection programs have been focusing on milk yield and maybe composition and not really on fertility as much as it was supposed to be. And I think the same situation arose in South Africa, or was in South Africa, and it's also a country that's very much dependent on imports of semen, very much so. So basically, in a sense, we are followers of world trends of genetic changes in dairy cattle. Okay, the questions that Carl asked is what the old problem I think one has in terms of the definition of traits, and he has then, I think through literature studies, they have then basically done, I think, where what a lot of member countries here has also been done over time, and used information that was available at some of these herds to define some of the reproduction traits. It's all about AI date, voluntary or involuntary withholding of AI and so forth that's been used then in the study. Traditionally, calving interval is being used. At this stage, we only use calving interval as a reproduction trait in South Africa in the national evaluations. So, as I've mentioned, reproduction information is available at the herd level. Quite a lot of dairy farmers do have software available at farm level, PC software, and recording is being done at farm level. So the challenge is just to get that data as part of the database, the national database. What's then available is calving and AI dates. And also where there's voluntary waiting periods, the farmer is also, or record that on a system, which makes it easier then not to penalize the cow in a case where you have a long period before you have a pregnancy. Okay, so the aim of this study was basically what he says, to outcomes, to evaluate alternative fertility traits to calving interval, and to establish a possible level of reproduction management. So it's not just a genetic study in a sense, but also to use some management parameters or benchmarks to also assist farmers to make management decisions and to benchmark themselves against economic parameters to be that has a huge influence on the profitability of these farming enterprises, and then also as part of the study to estimate some genetic parameters on fertility traits. I don't have a list of fertile or infertile cows yet, but obviously that would be the end goal in terms of selection of objectives. Okay, so the data being used are reproduction records from Holstein herds of cows that has at least calved once. So there's no heifer fertility really in that sense included of those that did not conceive for the first time. And what was available is then also calving dates, lactation number, AI dates, and the PDs, the pregnancy results. From that, it's obvious that you can easily work out the so-called interval traits, whether this animal was pregnant at 80 days or 120 days or whatever. And also the fact that you work with binomial data or observations, it was also then necessary to make the adjustments for that. It was done in 14 Holstein herds, 9,000 cows, so it's not really a big data set, with 24,000 lactations and quite a number of 70,000 AI records. Data was collected between 1991 and 2007. Okay, now we get to some of the trait definitions, which gave me a bit of a headache to remember all these acronyms or abbreviations. So there's a calving date to first AI, calving date to conception, number of AIs per conception, which I think is also a well-known trait being used elsewhere. And then also making or using something like a voluntary waiting period not to penalize a cow as such. Although I think one can also argue that high producers might have the benefit of a voluntary waiting period. And then average dates between heats, because the heat observation is also part of the data set, and the detection rate that was observed. I think this is very obvious where you have a binomial trait, it's either 1 or a 0, and this is then done at 3 periods in terms of pregnancy diagnosis and also whether there was in fact an AI done after calving, that's a CFS, and whether an animal is pregnant or not, it's a 0 or a 1. The normal, hopefully the right statistical methodology has been used, especially in terms of the binomial traits that were considered. Carl has just basically included the basic stuff here in this slide in terms of the models fitted and also the methodology used for these variance and covariance estimations. This is just giving you a general background to the type of data being used. You can see it's about between 14,500 and 16,000 records with some of the values in there. I still don't know, I've read this last 3 rows as 1 and 2, so I thought it was 0s and 1s, but it doesn't matter. It's a binomial expression of those traits. Okay, just a few estimates. I think as could be expected with reproduction traits, they're all in the, or they vary in the region from 1% to maybe 9% heritability estimates. So this is then just being reported here. I guess there's also a fair amount or differences in variation in terms of whether you measure these traits at 80, 100 or 200 days, where some animals had more chance in terms of conceiving. Then also just a few genetic correlations. I think also as expected, the sign at least of these genetic correlations are in the area that one expects. When I read through this, I was questioning a few that's very extremely on the high side, close to unity, and maybe we should talk about that when I get back home to see whether it's actual valid values. Mr. Chair, I would like to conclude. It is possible, I think, also for us in South Africa to look at the alternative fertility traits. We are now in a position where we can accommodate this on the centralized database, and these correlations at this early stage shows that it would be advisable to also include some of them in our selection index that we're currently employing for dairy animals in the country. And he basically suggests here that the best traits then would be the date from calving to first AI, days open, and AI or straws per conception. And he has also observed that there's a fair amount of genetic variation between cows as far as these traits are concerned. Although we must accept that there's a management effect, it always leaves the challenge that your contemporary group definition needs to be well defined. Otherwise, you can have a little bit of environmental noise, I guess, in your parameter estimations, also the breeding value predictions. But also to use it, as a previous speaker said, to use it as a management tool rather than a genetic tool to get farmers to start recording this and to get it as part of the database. Okay, so he said that the most important reproduction indicators at this stage, and he was also referring to a study, a similar study that was done in Australia based on a survey, that service rate of cows at 60 days in milk and pregnancy rate at 150 days of milk could be good indicators also on the management level, fertility management level of specific herds. Chair, that's what I have to offer this afternoon. I'll try to ask questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yappy.